James Jeffrey, thanks so much. And we're also joined by David Roches, who's a missile and defence analyst and former NATO operations director in the Office of Security. He joins us now. He's at the National Defence University in DC. Thanks so much for being with us, David. You heard President Zelensky there thanking the American people for their support for this additional military package that the White House announced today. What do you think of these Patriot missile, the one Patriot defence system that's being sent to Ukraine? President Zelensky said in the press conference he'd be back asking for more.
Well, he will be back asking for more. I mean, this is, at this point, is more of a symbolic statement than an actual military capability. We don't know what variants of the missiles have been committed, and we don't know if they're going to come out of American inventories. I mean, in the past, we've managed to broker German batteries to be transferred to Jordan and Korea, and we've brokered a Greek battery transferred to Saudi Arabia. So this could come from another allied country like Spain. But the big thing is that it takes a long time to operate and an even longer time to learn how to maintain a Patriot missile battery. That will be a matter of months rather than weeks for full maintenance. And, you know, the Patriot itself is not a glass dome that drops down on a town. It only defends a point. So this one battery will make a difference in the area that it defends, but only in that area.
And David, what do you make of the timing of President Zelensky's visit to Washington? He's come here right from the front line, from Bakhmut. How would you assess the state of the battlefield at this moment?
Well, I tell you, it's in flux, but basically the Ukrainians appear to have the initiative in the north, where they're looking to extend further into Luhansk Oblast. They have the initiative in the south, where they recently disrupted a key ground line of supply in Melitopol and are poised to possibly drive into Melitopol and close the land bridge to Crimea. They've been conducting remote attacks on Crimea itself, and they've been disrupting the power grid in Russia proper, although not on the scale that Russia has been doing it in Ukraine. In Bakhmut, though, on the other hand, there the Russians just seem to be throwing bodies into, a somewhat militarily insignificant town. They seem to be fighting for pride, and they don't seem to care how many casualties they suffer. That seems more reminiscent of the Battle of Verdun in World War I than of modern warfare.
Wow, David, thanks. Stay with us. And James Jeffrey, let me just turn to you. Do you see this as a decisive moment in the war, that President Zelensky's coming here to ask for more help, or is it more of a stalemate as winter unfolds?
It is across the board at the strategic level a stalemate, although I agree with David Roches on the specific front back and forth. Nonetheless, this signals that the United States, and we'll hear tonight, I'm sure, the U.S. Congress stands behind Zelensky and stands behind a fairly maximalist position that both he took and President Biden at least publicly endorsed. But again, as David said, how you give weapons, how many you give, is sending a signal both to Zelensky and to Putin. We could give more Patriots faster. We could be giving modern armor. The president mentioned armor, but he's talking about Russian equipment that's still in the West. We're not giving first-line American Abrams or German Leopard tanks to the Ukrainians. And as I said, we could be giving them longer-range ATACMS missiles. Those are things that the Ukrainians want. And not giving it to them, we limit on the margins their military capability, but far more, we're sending by incremental approach a signal to Putin. We can do more. We can make your life harder. We want you to think twice about where this is all going.
Fascinating. And David Roches, we heard from the Russians today, Dmitry Peskov, the Putin spokesman, said that sending more weapons will just aggravate the conflict. How do you think the Russians are going to react to this signaling, as Jim Jeffrey was saying there?
Well, the Russians have said all along that any support of Ukraine just draws out a bloody conflict. So why don't the Ukrainians just surrender? And I'm like, well, why don't the Russians just surrender? Then the conflict can be over. The Russians are not happy with this development. One of the most surprising aspects of this war has been the Russian failure of electronic warfare. which I thought they were the best in the world in, and the Russian inability to establish air superiority. So right now, the Ukrainian air defense systems are ex-Soviet Union. They're obviously running out of those, and they're not going to be able to procure any more from Russia. So eventually, they're going to have to move to a Western system, and that generally means Patriot. Strategically, this is an important step towards that capability that will allow Ukraine to independently defend its airspace. But tactically, it's going to take a long time to do this. And my one worry is that the limited logistical lines of Ukraine will be overwhelmed with different types of equipment. And I think that's probably the strongest argument for not sending things like the Abrams tanks. You don't want to have different vehicles with different spares and different calibers of guns. We've got to come up with a strategic vision for standardizing the future Ukrainian armed force around a sustainable model. Hopefully that's what they're discussing tonight.
Interesting. Thanks, David. Well, let's just throw ahead now to the symbolism of this address to the joint meeting of Congress. And Jim Jeffrey, what is the value of this? President Zelensky addressing the US Congress. What message is that meant to send to Russia and the world?
First of all, he's talking through the Congress more even than with President Biden to the American people. You notice with Biden, he stressed children, he stressed peace, he stressed themes that I'm sure he will stress again with the Congress that appeal to Americans and bring home this geostrategic huge problem to a human level. And that's very important. And Congress is the place to do it. Others have done this, of course, before him. Churchill is the best example we've heard today, but there have been others. And he's a master at this. And I believe also by just being there, he will shift the feelings among those on the left in the Democratic Party and some of those Republicans who are hesitant. It's not a large number, but we want it as small as possible. And I think that's what he'll achieve today.
Interesting. And David, of course, war is fought not just on the battlefield, but via propaganda. How do you see the value of tonight for President Zelensky as he wages war against Russia on so many fronts?
Yeah, boy, you raised a really good point. Look, Zelensky could have lost the war in the first day if he accepted our offer to evacuate. I mean, you know, it's easy for us to count up weapon systems and artillery rounds and capabilities, but we forget war is a human activity. It's fought by humans. And, you know, if humans lose morale, which you can't measure, then you see what happened to the Afghan forces, where a militarily superior power just folds up. What Zelensky has done is become an icon and a symbol of national leadership, but he's inspired his soldiers to do what military leaders want to do, which is get your soldiers to do the impossible and not accept defeat. So this cements that. And I think it will be a boost for this sort of hard to measure, but vitally important components of morale and fighting spirit that have really been the difference in this war for the Ukrainians.
David DeRoche, thanks so much for being with us. And Jim, just briefly, if you could, President Zelensky was brought here in a US military aircraft. Why?
Because that's the safest and most secure way to get him here and back. The Russians would not do anything to interfere with a U.S. aircraft. I'm sure that they were, in fact, I know they were informed in advance.
OK, Ambassador Jim Jeffrey, thank you very much indeed for that nugget there. And in an hour's time, President Zelensky of Ukraine will address a joint meeting of the United States Congress. We'll bring you that speech live here on BBC News with full analysis afterwards. Thanks for watching.